جمع‌کرانی fascism or fascism جمع‌کرانی, as some people suggest. This has to be somehow confronted and be defeated.
Thank you.
So whatever you can answer to these questions, I appreciate it.
That's a good point. Please, our friend here.
There was a moment around the Islamic Revolution of 1979 when students in Tehran offered flowers to soldiers. Now, this could be seen in some ways as illustrating Simon's notion of the infinite demand, possibly in the following sense. You have a moment of an other, a very dangerous other in this case, the soldier, and the students are offering a flower, and they're saying, you are completely different from us, but we wish to say we acknowledge you. And by acknowledging you, we hope to transform this moment of an ethical demand, to something political. I would put it to the four of you that that has not happened with the Green Movement. What we have is a bourgeois middle-class movement, which is largely urban, and using precisely the icons that we would see mobilized in any type of political struggle today worldwide. But I would ask, am I being unfair in saying this? I would ask you, are we dignifying it by calling it political? For instance, I would ask, and I'm not here saying I know the answer to this, to what extent does it engage with people in the rural areas? To what extent does it engage with the peasants, the farmers, with the workers, with the teachers? To what extent does it actually negotiate, to some extent, as Danny alluded in his final remarks, with the legacy of the Islamic Revolution and how to move it forward? At the moment, I'm not convinced it does. And so despite the bombast of Andrew Arato's comment, I think that he does make a valuable point. Is the comparison we're making really to Eastern Europe before, are we making comparison to Eastern Europe during the Solidarity movement? Or are we actually looking at Eastern Europe after it? After all, what is really a distinction between the Green Movement and the Iranian regime at the moment in terms of economics? I don't think there is one. I think they're both neoliberal movements seeking to control a clientelist or rentier state and wrest it in their own ways. So then I'll try to sum up with just a very specific question. Is there a potential to see the Green Movement as offering us a new way of imagining politics? And if it is so, to what extent does that new way of imagining politics actually mean that at the moment there is hope in Iran?
Thank you. Please, this will be our last intervention.
My name is Joanne Landy, and I'm with the Campaign for Peace and Democracy that Danny so kindly mentioned. And I was very supportive of Danny's remarks. And I think he's right to see the East European history as something that really we need to examine and take its lessons. And I'm not saying so much what your tactics are, whether you're revolutionary, violent or nonviolent, whether you're revolutionary today or limiting yourself to certain democratic demands today as far as the demonstrations are concerned. But I think it's really important for people to think about what happens if you take power, as they did in Eastern Europe, and as they didn't actually expect to, but it fell upon them. And I remember our organization and I were very involved in supporting the East European Solidarity movement and the democratic movement there. And afterwards, Adam Michnik was here in New York, and I asked him in a meeting at Human Rights Watch, how could you have come out of the workers' movement and defending the workers' movement, and then when you took power, you cast out thousands and thousands of shipyard workers into unemployment. You didn't say that when you were before 1989. So he said, well, we didn't expect to come to power, and there we were, and we had to do something. So I think we want to avoid that situation. In particular, if you have 80% of the economy owned by the state, are you going to do a shock therapy? I believe that's what Andrew was suggesting, that yes, you need to crack it wide open, privatize, so forth and so on, and then you can do something more mellow. Well, I think that kind of moment of trying to think of, are there ways to democratize state-owned property, much of it, if not all of it, is a very important practical question. Again, I'm not saying this should be the organizing principle for the movement in the streets today, but I think that Danny is absolutely right that these are issues that you don't have the luxury to not think about.
Thank you. Let's go back along the line. So Danny first, and then Charlie and Ali.
Thanks. It's hard to remember now exactly who asked or said what, so I'll just see if I can kind of do a grab bag here. Yeah, just pick an idea or two. The gentleman who mentioned that this is not, it would not be wise to push economic issues strategically at this moment. I think that's right, and I think I said that in my talk. There are very good reasons why the political questions are foregrounded and the economic questions are simply not. I wasn't suggesting that the Green Movement strategically begin to organize around economic issues. What I was suggesting is that it begin to do the intellectual work of thinking about what kind of economic arrangements and structures it would propose if it were to assume power, whenever that might be. That's what I think of in Gramscian terms as a kind of prefigurative struggle or preparation, which is not to suggest that economics should be the sort of organizing strategic principle of the movement. However, having said that, there is no question that something which hasn't really come up yet today, the labor movement in Iran, could very well, as it did in 1978-79, could very well play a critical role in the current struggle. There is the possibility of strikes. There is the possibility of a general strike. This has been largely under-examined, but I would strongly encourage everyone in this room to go to the website IranLaborReport.com, a new publication, web-based, of the network of Iranian labor unions, which will allow you to see some of the thinking in real time of labor organizers and trade unionists in Iran today. That leads me to respond to the gentleman here in front who had some very interesting observations. And just briefly, this notion that the Green Movement is bourgeois and middle class is simply sociologically and empirically untrue. It is simply not the case that the Green Movement is predominantly bourgeois or middle class. It is a cross-section of Iranian society. There are sociologists and commentators far more knowledgeable about the details of this than I in this room. Perhaps we can hear from them later on today. I would strongly encourage you to look at the work of Ervand Abrahamian on this very question. He wrote a piece for the London Review of Books over the summer, maybe the fall, that addressed this directly and contradicted it. You can look at this recent piece by Nasreen Alavi in the New Internationalist called This Magic Green Bracelet, in which she looks at the fact that many even of the students, okay, so you look at, depends how you look at class, if you look at many of the student leaders and young leaders of the Green Movement today, they themselves are from working class and poor families. They themselves are the children of veterans of the Iran-Iraq War and so forth. So how one wants to carve this up gets complicated, but it is simply not the case that it is a predominantly, let alone exclusively, bourgeois middle-class movement. And finally, your point about connecting, has the Green Movement connected to the Islamic Revolution? It's a good question. I thought Charlie Kurtzman did an elaborate demonstration of the ways in which it precisely has connected very consciously and cleverly and in fascinating ways with the legacy of 1978 and 79, shouting "God is great" from rooftops, using the iconography and the language to do an imminent critique of the Islamic Republic from within. I mean, I think that those connections are very much there, and I would simply conclude by saying that your attempt at a class analysis of the Green Movement really falls flat on its face when you look at the fact that trade unionists and labor organizers in Iran today are completely behind the Green Movement, and in fact their organizations and their attempts to campaign for their rights have been crushed violently in many cases by the Ahmadinejad faction of the regime, by the Iranian state. And so how